Hello, my name is Danny. I was an active Latter-day Saint for 60 years. From my youth, I was exposed to the 13 Articles of Faith of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was encouraged to commit them to memory. The Articles of Faith were written by Joseph Smith in 1842 and was canonized as scripture in the Pearl of Great Price. Basically, it is a statement of faith or a creed by which Latter-day Saints should live their lives to be in good standing as members of the Mormon Church. It states in Articles of Faith number 12, quote, "We believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law," end quote. And then it says in Article 13, quote, "We believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and doing good to all men," etc. End quote. Are these genuine statements of faith, or are they simply platitudes? Based on the shocking news of 2023, we learned that top LDS leadership were involved in intentionally violating those two articles of faith by not obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law, and by not being honest and true. And why am I saying all of this? Well, it's because I have in my hands proof that the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints intentionally violated federal Securities and Exchange Commission laws for nearly 3 consecutive decades before eventually getting caught. The reason I'm raising this issue is because I've heard that the LDS Church might currently be under investigation by the IRS for tax evasion. So we want to keep an eye on that, which would not surprise me in the least based on the church's track record and history. Also, I promised in my recent videos titled Truth About Tithing, Part 1 and 2, that I would record a video addressing how the LDS Church has been using tithing donations in ways that might both surprise and frustrate you as a member of the church. So let's get started. As I mentioned, I have right here a copy of the February 21st, 2023 9-page cease and desist order from the United States Securities and Exchange Committee in the matter of Ensign Peak Advisors and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A cease and desist order proceeding is a formal legal process initiated when somebody sends a letter demanding that the other party immediately stop certain harmful, illegal behavior. It is often a precursor to a lawsuit intended to resolve the issue through a settlement without going to court. And if you don't know already, Ensign Peak Advisors, Inc. is a Utah nonprofit corporation responsible for investing and managing the reserves of the LDS Church. Ensign Peak is governed by board of directors consisting of the 3 members of the church's presiding bishopric and the managing director of Ensign Peak. Ensign Peak's managing director is appointed by the church's first presidency and reports directly to the senior leadership of the church, which is comprised of the first presidency. If you want to follow along with me, you go to sec.gov and click on SEC charges the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and then click on SEC order, where you can print the order or read it online. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read the entire order, but I do want to read some of the highlighted statements and then make a few comments regarding them. And then, pay attention to the timelines as I go through this. Here is the facts of the order. And in most of the cases here, I'm actually reading from the order itself. And then I'm going to throw in my own comments. Facts of the order. The church created Ensign Peak in 1997 to manage its reserve funds purchased with excess tithing, income, and returns generated by Ensign Peak. At its inception, Ensign Peak managed approximately $7 billion of church assets under Form 13F. Those securities grew to approximately $37.8 billion by 2020. Throughout its history, Ensign Peak was required to file quarterly forms 13F, identifying and providing certain information about the securities it managed for the church. By 1998, senior management of Ensign Peak was aware of its requirement to file forms F13 and communicated this to senior leadership in the church. That's the first presidency. To prevent disclosure of the securities portfolio managed by Ensign Peak, the church approved Ensign Peak's plan of using other entities instead of Ensign Peak to file Form 13F. The church was concerned that disclosure of the assets in the name of Ensign Peak, which is public, a known church affiliate, would lead to negative consequences in light of the size of the church's portfolio. So here, the church was worried that members might quit paying their tithing once they learned where it was being invested and to what extent it had increased in the stock market. Going on, Ensign Peak did not have the authority to implement this approach without the approval of the church's first presidency. And I want to say this included, the top leadership throughout 3 consecutive first presidency administrations of Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson, and Russell M. Nelson. Going on, in 2001, Ensign Peak created an LLC, that's a limited liability company, and filed the first Form 13F with the approval of senior leadership of the church. This first LLC was assigned a location. Now you would think in Salt Lake? No, in Glendale, California, although it conducted no business there. The order goes on and says certain Ensign Peak employees were assigned to be investment managers for that LLC. However, Ensign Peak failed to transfer any investments there. In 2005, Ensign Peak formed a second LLC with location in Wilmington, Delaware, and filed Forms 13F in the name of this new LLC. The order goes on. In 2011, Ensign Peak became concerned that its portfolio had become so large that the Form 13F filings that it made using the name of the second LLC might attract unwanted attention. So Ensign Peak sought the church's approval to form additional LLCs to file Forms 13F. On May 19, 2011, the church's senior leadership approved Ensign Peak's recommendation to clone the second LLC to create a new Form 13F filer. After obtaining church approval, Ensign Peak formed 5 new clone LLCs for the purpose of filing Forms 13F. Each of these new entities was given Delaware addresses, although none of the LLCs conducted business in Delaware. Going on. In 2015, a third party connected the holdings of the various LLCs across the country and traced them back to Ensign Peak. Ensign Peak brought this to the attention of church leadership. The senior leadership of the church approved Ensign Peak's recommendation to gradually and carefully adapt Ensign Peak's corporate structure to strengthen the portfolio's confidentiality. Going on. Finally, on November 6, 2015, the senior leadership of the church approved Ensign Peak's plan for the creation of additional clone LLCs to further prevent disclosure of the church's holdings managed by Ensign Peak. Ensign Peak then formed 6 additional clone LLCs, bringing the total to 12. Going on, Ensign Peak had authority over all of the LLCs throughout their existence. The church also had indirect authority over all these LLCs since the church controlled Ensign Peak and approved the approach of using LLCs to file Forms 13F. These clone LLCs never exercised investment discretion of the church's assets. Their investment managers did not know which assets were allocated to the clone LLCs and performed no functions for the LLCs. Each clone LLC was set up with a business manager who, according to the terms of the LLC agreement, had responsibility for the preparation and filing of the company's governmental reports, returns, notices, and the like. However, the business managers performed no functions for the clone LLCs outside of simply signing the Form 13F signature pages each quarter. Going on. Ensign Peak was responsible for designing the clone's LLC business managers, many of them who were church employees. Business managers were selected because they had common names and a limited presence on social media and were therefore less likely to be publicly connected to Ensign Peak or the church. So you can see here the obfuscation that's going on. Going on here in the order, Ensign Peak provided the business managers with very limited information about the clone LLCs or why they were even created. Each clone LLC was given an address outside of Utah, although none of them conducted any business at those locations other than the receipt of mail. Ensign Peak chose multiple locations across the country for these purported offices to create the impression that the clone LLCs conducted business operations throughout the U.S., making it more difficult to trace the clone LLCs back to Ensign Peak or the church. So you can see how that's being dishonest and untruthful about their business dealings. Going on in the order here, each clone LLC was also assigned a local phone number that would go directly to voicemail. An Ensign Peak senior manager instructed the business manager of one of the clone LLCs to notify them of all voicemails from regulatory agencies to any of the clone LLCs and to delete all others. Sneaky. Now, under the title, Ensign Peak filed misstated Forms 13F. The report goes on. After the clone LLCs were formed, Ensign Peak prepared and filed Forms 13F with the Commission under the names of the clone LLCs. Each Form 13F, filed in the name of a clone LLC, misstated, in other words, they lied, that the LLC had sole investment discretion for the securities listed and there were no other managers for these securities, and that the clone LLC had sole voting discretion over these securities. Ensign Peak continued to manage the entire portfolio. Each Form 13F was signed by the designated business manager. However, Ensign Peak provided the business managers with insufficient information about the clones LLCs or the securities assigned to them that would enable the business managers to represent with their signatures that all the information was true, complete, and correct. And the business managers were only given the signature pages of the Forms 13F and not the complete documents. In addition, Forms 13F were often filed with electronic signatures before Ensign Peak actually obtained the business manager's handwritten signatures. Each Form 13F also misstated that the business manager signed the Form 13F from the address listed on the signature page. In fact, all business managers were located in Salt Lake City, and the addresses on the forms were used to convey the impression that the clone LLCs were located across the country. So they were making liars out of those poor coerced employees pretending to be business managers of these clone LLCs. Now here's an important paragraph. It goes on and says, throughout its history, at least once a year, Ensign Peak's managing director met with the senior leadership of the church, that's the first presidency and the presiding bishopric, those 6 men, to discuss Ensign Peak's activities, including, at times, the LLC structure. Unanimous approval from the senior leadership of the church was required before Ensign Peak could deviate from the LLC structure and file Forms 13F in Ensign Peak's own name. The church and Ensign Peak continued to take the same approach in filing Forms at 13F through the clone LLCs despite two church audit department internal audits of Ensign Peak in 2014 and one in 2017 that reviewed the LLC structure. In discussions with Ensign Peak's senior management, although the church audit department did not recommend specific changes to the LLC structure, the church audit department highlighted the risk that the SEC might disagree with their approach. So they had been warned by their own audit department. The LLC structure was made public. That's the next section of this order. In May 2018, a public website reported that various entities that appeared to have ties to the church had filed Forms 13F revealing holdings of approximately $32 billion. The website referenced evidence indicating that these entities' domains names were all registered to an entity tasked with overseeing and protecting the intellectual property of the church, and that each of the LLCs listed a business manager whose name matched that of a church employee. After the website reported this information, two business managers resigned their roles, voicing concern about what they had been asked to do. So at least we have two employees of the church that were doing the honest thing. Going on, rather than changing the LLC structure, two new business managers were assigned to replace the two who had resigned. So here we see that the church president and his counselors were determined to proceed with this illegal practice. Okay, going on. Ensign Peak continued to file Forms 13F through the clones LLCs until February 14th, 2020, when Ensign Peak decided to file a consolidated Form 13F for the quarter ended December 31st, 2019. Ensign Peak's Form 13F consolidated securities previously listed on the various Forms 13F filed in the names of the clone LLCs. Consequently, Ensign Peak's first original Form 13F disclosed its management of securities valued at approximately $37.8 billion. Now, here's what the order lists under violations. As a result of the conduct described above, Ensign Peak violated Section 13F1 of the Exchange Act and Rule 13F-1 by failing to file Form 13F in Ensign Peak's name. Similarly, Ensign Peak violated the same section by filing misstated Forms 13F in the names of the LLCs created for the sole purpose of filing Forms 13F. As a result of the conduct described above, the church caused Ensign Peak's violation of the section listed. In view of the foregoing, the Commission deems it appropriate to impose the sanctions agreed upon, the sanctions agreed to in the respondents' offers. So what's happening here is the Commission, after years of negotiations with the church, agreed to accept the church's offer to settle the issue outside of court. Okay, going on. Accordingly, it is hereby ordered that respondent Ensign Peak ceased and desist from committing or causing any violations and any future violations of Section 13F of the Exchange Act and Rule. Pursuant to Section 20C of the Exchange Act, respondent, the church, shall cease and desist from committing or causing any violations or future violations of Section 13F of the Exchange Act and Rule. Now, here's the fine. After all of this, this is what it came down to. Ensign Peak shall, within 10 days of the entry of this order, pay civil money penalty to the amount of $4 million to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The church shall, within 10 days of the entry of this order, pay a civil money penalty in the amount of $1 million to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the order. But Ensign Peak, along with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in violation of the law, had to pay a combined fine of $5 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's nothing when you consider the LDS Church is now worth approximately $300 billion. It's on its way to $1 trillion. It's like a slap on the wrist, this fine was. It made $5 million. The church, Ensign Peak made that money back in, within a couple of hours in the stock market with that kind of investment. The church was worried about the public and members knowing how much the money was, or the church was hoarding, how much money the church was hoarding. Why would knowledge of the truth have a negative consequence for the church? Members might quit paying tithing after learning how much wealth the church has accumulated, plus the fact that their hard-earned income was being invested in the stock market instead of using that sacred offering to directly bless the lives of the less fortunate. October 2019, President Russell M. Nelson continued his fervent focus on improving the Faith Temple Worship Sunday at the concluding session of the 189th Semi-Annual General Conference. He read an updated list of questions church members will be asked when receiving a temple recommendation from their bishop. He stated, an LDS temple recommended interview questions, and then he listed every one of them. Number 9 states, do you strive to be honest in all that you do? These would be questions that a bishop or a stake president would be asking a member who wanted to qualify to be worthy for a temple recommendation. Do you strive to be honest in all you do? That's number 9. Number 15, do you consider yourself worthy to enter the Lord's house and participate in temple ordinances? Now, considering the SEC order we just read, is senior leadership of the LDS Church themselves worthy of a temple recommendation? And who do they answer to anyway? By intentionally violating the law, none of the 3 members of the first presidency or 3 members of the presiding bishopric for 3 administrations could or should have answered yes to question 9 and 15, because they didn't strive to be honest and shouldn't consider themselves worthy to go to the temple. In a press release on February 20th, 2023, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission stated, quote, we allege that the LDS Church's investment manager, meaning Ensign Peak, with the church's knowledge, that First Presidency and the presiding bishopric, went to great lengths to avoid disclosing the church's investment, depriving the commission and the investing public of accurate market information. And then on the same day, I have these press releases right here in my hands. I copied them off the internet. Wouldn't be accurate, the things I was telling you here. On the same day, the LDS Church newsroom issued a statement that, quote, church senior leadership received and relied on legal counsel when it approved of the use of the external companies to make the files, end quote. Of course, they're going to go throw their attorneys under the bus when they themselves, that the attorneys didn't have anything to do with this scam, I don't imagine. That's the way it always works in the corporate world. You blame it on the lawyers for bad advice. Take the focus off them. And the statement says, we reached resolution with SEC. We affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, and now consider this matter closed. So do they mean regretting the mistakes of getting caught or having done them in the first place for 3 decades? In 2015, Apostle Dallin H. Oak said, of the First Presidency said, the church does not seek apologies and we don't give them. So how is it that the church, namely the senior leadership, avoids having to say it's sorry and repents of their action? They now consider the matter closed. That's a message to the church members not to discuss this matter, even among themselves, from then on. Then I'm going to go on. But every misfiling in every shell company was directly approved by the First Presidency and presiding bishopric. These 6 men are highly educated men. They're not your typical plumber or teacher or whatever, blue collar people, honest workers. These 6 men are highly educated and knew fully well what Ensign Peak was doing to hide the church's assets. I mean, look at the last presidency that was involved in that, and that was Russell M. Nelson. In 2025, he was known as a renowned heart surgeon, a medical doctor. You got Henry Eyring, who's been in these first presidencies, and he's a Harvard business, Stanford professor of business. Well educated. Dallin Oaks is a law professor and a former Supreme Court judge. Come on, you mean to tell me that they were buffaloed by their lawyers? I don't think so. The presiding bishopric, that involved Gerald Cauze, a business master's degree. Christopher Waddell, however you say his last name. Merrill Lynch, vice president of investments. Todd Budge, president and CEO of Tokyo Star Bank. These guys knew what they were doing. These 6 top executives of the LDS Church are guilty of intentionally breaking federal law, as stated in the order. Top executives of secular corporations usually step down, resign, and are fired when they intentionally violate federal laws. Shouldn't these men do the same? Sometimes guilty parties serve jail or prison time for their crimes. No. In my opinion, the LDS Church is not run by God prophets as in the Bible times. It is run by prophet managers, Profit. Lawyers and educated businessmen. These 15 men are not theologians by any stretch of the imagination. They are business executives. They are running a multi-hundred-billion-dollar corporation under the guise of religion, in my opinion. Their primary goal is to grow the church financially. They are investing donated tithing funds that they call sacred to turn a profit. They call it a rainy day fund for the second coming, as if Jesus needs the money. The LDS Church has become the wealthiest religious institution in the world at over $300 billion and increasing. Some people might say, well, that prosperity is a sign of a true church. But I say it's a sign of man-made material religion. These men who are propped up to be the representatives of the church, to be representatives of Jesus Christ, are at odds with what is written in their own scriptures. What would Jesus Christ have said about all of this? According to the scriptures, what advice would he give to these leaders? Would he command them to bury their treasure, to hide it in false LLCs? Would he command them to deceive the public and members by setting up shell companies? Would he tell them to be dishonest and violate the laws of the land? Or would Jesus tell these leaders to give it away to the poor? Build homeless shelters, hospitals, schools, dig wells, cure disease and world hunger. If Jesus was running the Mormon Church, would it look like it does today? Would he be investing tithing money to build temple buildings, malls, cattle ranches, farmlands, apartment buildings, and office buildings? Would he be telling the poorest of poor to pay their tithing first? I don't think the church would look anything like it does today if Jesus was running it. In fact, Jesus gave some powerful teaching concerning this very subject. In Mark 11:15 through 17, it says, quote, "And they come to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught, saying unto them, Is it not written, my house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves, end quote. This reminds me how Jesus would have reacted to the Security Exchange Commission charges against the LDS Church. How is it any different? You can't make a profit off the salvation of men and women. Has the Mormon Church also become a, quote, den of thieves in this regard? The top leadership claims it is saving up for a rainy day, but Jesus taught in Mark chapter 6, verse 19 through 21, quote, lay not up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will be your heart also, end quote. Jesus makes the point that we can know the heart of these LDS men by where they are laying up their earthly treasures. Their hearts are full of greed and pride. Jesus counsels the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19, verse 16 through 22. And I'll sum it up with this. Quote, now behold, one came and said unto him, good teacher, what good things shall I do that I may have eternal life? So he said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. He said unto him, which ones? Jesus said, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The young man said to him, if you... all these things I have kept from my youth. What do I still lack? Jesus said unto him, quote, if you want to be perfect, go and sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. But when the young man heard the saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions, end quote. Well, ironically, the church's yearly theme for the correlated curriculum of Sunday school is come follow me. Here, Jesus is telling the young man to sell all he has and give it to the poor. Well, if the LDS Church did the same, they could truly come and follow Jesus. But they won't, because just like the young man, they would be sorrowful, for they have great possessions. All of this should cause every Latter-day Saint great concern about who is truly running the Mormon Church. I'm convinced that Jesus Christ would be appalled that all of this dishonesty and hypocrisy is being carried out in his name. Something to consider. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, go to YouTube or at talkingtomormons.com. And until next time, God bless.